Welcome back. And as we move on in our conversation today, we start by reviewing the strides of the administration in the oil and gas sector in the last 1 year. An important subject to have, and as Jeffrey said earlier on, it's a sector that has 3 ministers, the president himself, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, being the minister of oil and gas. And of course, we have minister of oil, petroleum, and minister of oil, gas. And there's been a number of strides in that sector in the last 1 year, and even more if you consider, the groundbreaking oil theft that was discovered, by the private security firm employed by government. And of course, there has been very little accountability in that area in the last 1 year plus, especially since the coming in of the new administration. So, but what are some of the achievements as against what was promised, particularly in the manifesto of then a candidate of the APC, as against what is happening now? Joining us to have this all-important conversation on the program this morning, we have 2 gentlemen, and let's welcome Mr. Olabode Showunmi to the program. We have 3 of them, as a matter of fact. Mr. Olabode Showunmi is the chairman, New Energies and Hydrogen Study Group of NGA, and he's also a member group of experts on gas, UNECE. He's also the CEO, Captree Limited. Good morning and welcome, Mr. Olabode Showunmi. Very quickly, because we have a 3-man panel this morning, let me also introduce former President, Trade Union Congress, Mr. Peter Esele, and he's also the former President, Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, Pengasan. You're welcome, Mr. Esele. And lastly, on this panel, we have Mr. Billy Gillis-Harry, National President, Petroleum Products Retail Outlets Owners Association of Nigeria, Petrian. Good morning and welcome, gentlemen. Let me just confirm that you can all hear me.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I can hear you clearly.
Good morning. Loud and clear from here as well.
Okay. It's a good thing that you can all hear me. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Esele. Let's start with a look at the manifesto. When I took a second look at it yesterday, what was visibly absent on the promised deliverables was the diligence to ensure that the refineries are delivered, i.e. Port Harcourt Refinery, Kaduna Refinery, Warri Refinery. I doubt if I saw that in the manifesto. Do you think it was deliberate because of the trajectory of, how the refineries have performed in the last couple of decades? Mr. Esele, I'd like you to take that first.
Well, good morning. And I think that may not be deliberate, because if you look at his plan is omnibus, because he's talking about having the right technology to make sure that that critical sector works for Nigerians. So when you have that in your manifesto, what that invariably means is that they are all encompassed, and they are all a plan that is to take care of the entire value chain. So, but our concern here will be, when will that refinery come on stream? Well, hopefully the GMG of NNPC, they have spoken about refinery, Port Harcourt especially, coming on stream. Maybe the second quarter, we are about coming to the end of the second quarter. But my main aspect is that don't also forget that the federal government has about 20% of the Dangote refinery too, invested about 20% of Dangote refinery. So hopefully with Dangote refinery ensuring that by June, that was what Alhaji Dangote said himself, that hopefully by June, there will no longer be any importation of petroleum products, which will be very good for the country and also help us put less pressure on FX.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Peter Esele. I'll come to you now, Mr. Gillis-Harry. Mr. Esele says that, what we should be looking at is something more holistic beyond the delivery of the refineries. But because of how critical, the delivery of the refineries are to the supply chain of the petroleum industry in the first place, don't you think it should have been prioritized in the manifesto? Mr. Harry, that's for you.
Good morning, Nigerians, and thank you for having me here. I will not agree any less with Mr. Peter Esele, but the fact that the refineries should be prioritized. It shouldn't even be a conversation. It should be top on the agenda of Mr. President. The agenda is renewed hope, and the hope that we're expecting to see in this sector will be exactly what can fast-track every possible development. And Petron, for example, has been calling for an emergency declaration and the repair and delivery of all the refineries. And we've been in the forefront of ensuring that we follow up with all the activities. So it will have been such a very good taste to see those refineries working today. We know that most of them are in advanced stage, like Port Harcourt and Warri. Dangote is a private refinery with 20% equity for Nigeria. I think that the refinery should have been top priority, and I still will call, on Mr. President and his team to see how we can fast-track the delivery of the refineries to start producing in country. That will go a long way to help our country, not just only in saving effects, but also making sure that our economy grows. Because most of the things we do in Nigeria here, being that we are lacking sufficient electricity power, is premised on fossil fuel generation of power. So refineries should be very important. I encourage so too.
And Mr. Showomi, I wonder if you have any other views contrary to what has been offered by Mr. Esele and Mr. Harry as they have spoken to the issue. Particularly, I'm asking, in addition to that, but relatedly, that is it, an approach of being non-committal to the delivery of the refineries that makes it, a visibly absent content on the manifesto?
Well, that question will be going into what they call it, a clairvoyance. I mean, trying to read people's mind. But if I'm to read precisely the whole energy policy, you will realize that globally we are in what we call energy transition, which is basically a system where they're trying to reduce fossil fuels. And Nigeria has dedicated this decade to be the decade of gas. And equally importantly, you will have seen that this administration has put a lot of emphasis on gas. I mean, it was in the news, reported even by channels, that the president refused to approve cars that are running on fossils at the moment, insisting that they will use gas. I'm not able to actually speak to the mind of the president. I'm not a politician in that sense, to be able to look at the political intent of the decision. But I can't speak to the facts of the matter. And yes, the refineries are not they are not moving, and they should be. They should be operating and running now. That is a responsibility for the NNPC via the support of the downstream regulator. But what we can see and what we have seen is the fact that there's a lot of emphasis placed on cars to be using gas, and there's a lot of efforts being made by even the regulator themselves to ensure that every filling station at the moment is using gas. So there are some things that are, I mean, when you talk about plans for future, there's strategy and there's tactics. You can have plans as a strategy, but tactics are usually things that change from day to day. So maybe the tactics of the overall strategy is to get on the road, see what is working and what is not working, and then adapt to it. So from my own perspective, I can see very clearly they going towards gas. Is that enough? That's a different case. Should the refineries be working? That's an absolute yes. Does the government need to put in more effort? That's definitely. And the people who are responsible for it need to also buckle their shoes.
All right, let me come to a very important issue, which has to do with our productivity. And when I look at the manifesto, gentlemen, I would like you all to speak to this particular issue, maybe in a particular sequence. It's the fact that of all the promises that were made, this seemed to be like one of the set of promises where the government had a goal and how to achieve that goal. You could see them write goal and solution. So let's go to one of which is increased domestic production. They say they will increase crude oil production by 2.6 million barrels per day by 2027, and they are getting to 4 million barrels per day by 2030. and their way is to increase domestic crude oil production. We must increase greater success in determining crude oil theft and preventing vandalism of our pipelines. But as we speak, we've not been able to meet our per quarter. In fact, in January, I think we did 1.2, we did 1.3 in February. Around March or April, we did about 1.4. We've been fluctuating, and that is because of the condensate element. So my question to you, Mr. Esele, looking at some of these promises, because we can't hold them beyond what they promise, how possible is it for the government to really meet its target in terms of production capacity, given the challenges we face, realistically, from an expert point of view?
Full rather than half empty, because you see there is a progress. There was a time in this country we were doing 900,000 barrels a day. What we have now, we have moved from they've moved from 900 to 1.2, 1.2 to about 1.4. So if you add the condensate element, they are doing at about 1.6 if you add the condensate element. So the projection by the NMPC is that before the end of the year, they are looking at doing 1.7. Now, if you also look at the other aspect of how do you increase production? First of all, you have to have the enabling environment, and then you have to have the issue of security, and then you also have to stop the pipeline vandalization. So what you have at the moment is that, yes, there's a reduction in that, but what I expect the government to do is to go ahead and make sure that those big fishes or big fish that are responsible for bunkering, that they are also brought to book. Because if you don't apply appropriate stance or appropriate measure, you are going to have issues around that. So that's why I use the word, I would rather say the glass is half full rather than half empty. Yes, are they making progress? Yes, they are making progress. But is it slow? It's also quite slow. So what we expect government to do is to look at the area of security and create the enabling environment for business to thrive. One thing is very clear: if you expect people to increase production, you must give them that environment for them to do it. One of the biggest problems we have in that sector is policy flip-flop. By policy flip-flop is that you wake up one morning and the government tells you this is what we want to do, this is our plan for oil and gas, and in another 2 months, and then you have another policy. That too should not be a factor anymore. The government must say this is our goal, and this is what we are doing to achieve that. I'm also happy that you pointed out that this is one area in their manifesto where they had to set various goals for themselves. If you also look at the other aspect of gas, Africa actually has 620 trillion cubic feet of gas, where Nigeria contributes about 30% of that. So if you look at our gas reserve, what we have at the moment, we can, at the going rate at which we are doing, it can take us another 100 years to completely exhaust it. So first is allow investors to come in there, provide the necessary security, provide the right policy trust to enable investment, and then we will say, okay, we are gradually making progress. Not until we do this, it will still be moving, but it's going to be as if we are crawling.
Let me come to you, Mr. Showman. The reason I asked that question, of course, I think I will listen to Mr. Patrick of Total Energies talking about the moving investments to, I think, Angola, so to the tune of $6 million or $6 billion. And one of the things he cited is safety and, of course, policy inconsistency, which is why I'm asking this question, that we need to get to a point of consistency in our production level, whether you see it or you don't see it happening. What do you see that is potentially hampering the ability to get to the level we want to get to, even if we're recording a progression? We're going to come to the NMPC part.
Okay, so first and fundamentally, oil, energy really, is international business. And globally, there are 3 areas that no government, and I repeat, none, even the US with the FBI, CIA, and border guards have not been able to fully control. One is illegal diamonds. The second is illegal drugs. The third is illegal crude. Illegal crude is an international menace. So when the government actually promised to end crude oil theft, what they meant was to significantly reduce it to a part where it doesn't affect the economy. There are parts of the theft that are dependent on Nigerians. We need not kid ourselves. It is very much like slave trade. It was one of the IOC's president who said that crude oil theft in Nigeria is like organized crime. So in other words, there are part of the people on the ground, there are part of people who work in the offices, there are part of security services that are involved in this. These are not things that are going to change overnight. So when the government makes this promise, they are making the promise, or I believe that they are making the promise within certain parameters. But having said that, it is still the responsibility of government to ensure that security is there. But if we look at where we were, which was less than 1 million, and we are now to 1.4, 1.6 within a year, I think that can, within reasonable sense, qualify as some amount of progress. Whether that is where we should be is a different ballgame. Whether that is where they promised is difficult to say, because they promised as against 2027, not as against 1 year. So if this talk is about to analyze the progress that has been made, I think that's one area they can definitely get a thumbs up in terms of what is obvious, what the facts on the matter is. In terms of moving forward, in terms of security, in terms of NNPC, in terms of, this is a responsibility that is fully Nigerian. And if we want progress, we have to avoid what we call the Messiah complex. The Messiah complex is a situation where we think one person or a certain clique will solve the problem that is the responsibility of everybody. So until we begin to ask those who are on the ground in some places in the Delta, we begin to ask those who are within the Navy and the security forces, until we begin to ask everybody questions, and people begin to be questioned, and like they did for Bobrisky when it came to defacing of the Naira, and some people go to jail. We are still going to be having this thing and having this conversation even in 10 years' time. So there must be some scapegoats. There must be questions to every fabric of society. And I believe very strongly that's where the progress lies.
Let me come to Mr. Gillis-Harris. Maybe moving away, you can speak to this maybe later, maybe as you're responding to the question. One of the things they promise is to accelerate full implementation of the PIA and implement additional favorable policies. One of the things we have not seen is this full implementation, especially the basic ones like the NNPC being quoted on the exchange. So we see NNPC as a regulator, as a player, and all of these elements that sometimes is quite confusing. We know they posted good numbers, but compare those numbers to Aramco and the rest of them, we need a bit of more good corporate governance. So for you, why do you think that the government or the NNPC, in agreement with the government, if you allow me to say so, because we own the NNPC as a country, though it's now a limited liability company, why is it difficult to begin to implement some of those very basic policies in the act that will help us, have a better corporate outlook for us to attract the kind of investment we need, especially in gas and oil?
Well, I think that whatever it is that NNPC has achieved, compared to what I personally will expect an oil company, a national oil company of that magnitude should achieve, has not, it's really something that's needing to have a harder look and more work to be done. If we have absolute knowledge and transparent knowledge, of course, of what is going on in NNPC, then it will be possible to make some assertions and also to proffer some kind of solutions and advice. There is no reason why Nigeria should not be in the top, oil-producing countries, commercial exchange and investment, attraction of investment, inward investment. What is required is just do the right thing, put policies that are transparent. We know that oil is such a very difficult thing to insist on transparency, 100%, but at least we can aim up to 85 or 90% of what is done with our oil and gas. And that in itself would be a pointer to how we should go. Now we have policies that came in from the PIA. NNPC today is really expected to be a commercial company. But again, I say this, NNPC is still having the advantage of working with the tools and assets of our sovereign, nationality. So it's also very important that while they are a limited liability company, we should also see transparently what they are doing. The accounting, the process of, pursuing our crude oil production, the process of getting crude oil for domestic consumption, the process of ensuring, that our sales, if we may, is returned, periodically and transparently, so that Nigerians will know. It will be much better if we look at NNPC from that perspective. But to your earlier question about what we think should be done to increase productivity, Mr. Seller and Shobumi has already narrated what is there. But I think what I want to insist there is ensuring that there is absolute understanding and implementation of the host policy regime. That will go a long way to ensuring that every community becomes a policeman in their area to guarantee safety of investors, guarantee safety of workers and NNPC, of Shell, of any company that's engaged in our fossil fuel exploration campaigns. Once that relationship between the community and the corporate organizations of the oil and gas, and also the government, is put in absolute unity, we'll see progress. Because when we say we have targeted to bring production up to 2.2 million, and we have done just 1.6, and that 1.6 is flip-flopping, that calls for, it calls for question. We need to know what happened. So do we have a roadmap? Do we have milestones to achieve? And if we do have this milestone to achieve, how are we pursuing that? And I think these are things that Nigerians should all be responsible, because the president, as he is a minister of petroleum, will obviously have little or no time for this sector. And the other two ministers of state, Minister of State for Petroleum and Minister of State for Gas, I believe should do as much as possible to create that environment where every Nigerian is part of the process to protect the infrastructure of our oil and gas reserves, production, distribution, and whatever it is.
All right, let's look at yet another component on the manifesto of the APC, speaking of what it promised, and this is about oil theft, to establish a special enforcement and monitoring unit whose sole mandate will be to protect the nation's pipelines with technological interventions. That was what was promised, to monitor the pipelines with technological interventions. But I'd like you gentlemen to also look at it against the backdrop of what is not contained specifically in that manifesto, which is consequence management for those who are pilfering the nation's resources in the form of economic sabotage that is stealing Nigeria's crude oil. Recall the major burst of pipelines that crude oil was being stolen from years, which we covered last year. Our correspondent accompanied the private security firm to the creeks. And also recall NATI's report, in which it said that the NNPC had an outstanding debt of 3.981 billion over recovery from Petroleum Support Fund scheme. So can we look at all of these independent, the promise of crude oil theft, rather, independent of lack of consequence management, lack of prosecution of those who have been fingered to be involved in major crude oil theft? I'm going to start with you, Mr. Esele, on this one.
Yes, one of the things, I think I alluded to that earlier, one of the things that is a major bane is that there are no consequences. We are aware that I watched it on channels where somebody, a tanker was seized, and at the end of the day, someone went ahead and set it on fire. And I'm asking myself questions. First of all, you damage the environment. Secondly, we don't know those who are behind those tankers. Thirdly, if we decide to prosecute, that's one of the evidence. There is none. So what you have is that we have a whole chain. The chain is that you cannot steal a barrel of crude without having security agencies being part of it. What we are dealing with is a failure of our various institutions. It's not just the president. We expect the president to do X, Y, Z. But the fact is that if you have somebody in NNPC, you have somebody in the upstream regulatory agency that is not doing his job, you have somebody in Nigerian Navy that is not doing his job, you have somebody in Nigerian Army, because and somebody in DSS, because all of these agencies that I've just mentioned are part of those that will sign off on anything leaving this country. So if you have a cartel whereby we go as, there was a time where they were reporting as high as 100,000 barrels a day being stolen. And if you have that and nobody is being arrested, nobody is being prosecuted, what we are dealing with is that it becomes a national security threat. So just imagine somebody, a barrel of crude, let's say it's even $3, and somebody, a group, are going away with 400,000 barrels a day, and just multiply that by 400,000, you will find out that in the long run, those guys are going to be a threat to national security. So first is that we must have an appropriate consequence management, which means that those who are behind all of these, the various institutions that are failing to deliver on what they have agreed to do, are brought to book. Once you do that, then you are sending out the message that, hey, this will no longer be tolerated. And then what you have done, you will substantially reduce what is being stolen. We don't hear about crude oil theft in places like the UK. We don't hear about crude oil theft in Saudi Arabia. There are technology to make sure that from point A to point Z, the Saudi Arabian government, the Aramco, you are able to see your pipeline. I've heard NNPC is trying to create something like that. I also heard NNPC now have their own what are called war room, where they're able to view all of majority of that pipeline. But they need to make all of this public, because one of the things that technology does is that technology not only stop theft, but what technology also does, it also prevents it. Because once somebody is aware that somebody somewhere is seeing whatever you are doing, that goes a long way to reduce crude oil theft. But as it is, it's not something we expect the government to it's not like ordering for an a la carte or going to shopping mall to buy cosmetics. It's something that you must design, you must plan, it must be systemic, and it must be structural. Our biggest problem here is that we talk a lot. On paper, we have all the documentation to solve our problems, but we lack the discipline to follow through.
Let me come to you, Mr. Showme. Everything we are saying here, Mr. Showme, boils down to one thing. Nigerians want to have, let's say, access to good fuel and affordable fuel at the end of the day. So that's the premise on which we're going to judge, if you will, on this particular issue. So one of the big questions I have on my mind to ask you, Mr. Showme, especially is it a bottleneck when you have the president as the minister of petroleum? Look at all the potential we have. About 37 billion in our reserve in terms of oil, and about over 200 trillion cubic feet in terms of our gas reserve. But when you look at what the NNPC is posting, when they posted $2.6 billion, Aramco was posting about over 150 or 60 billion dollars. And even the NNPC posting, if you look at their operating margin, is way overboard comparatively to the likes of Aramco. So when we want to query, the president has immunity. Does that affect the ability to be able to run that industry effectively, to be able to have the quality of petroleum industry we need to have as a country?
Okay. When you're talking management, there's a difference between managing and operations, or managing operations. Many times, okay, I'll give a simple example. This beautiful station, Channels TV, has its management, which resides in Lagos, I believe, and then has those who are responsible for operations and all that. In as much as the coach of a football team can give directions, it is still the responsibility of the players to play the ball. Now, whether the president is the minister or another person is the minister, in reality does not make too much difference. It is the quality of work that is done and the structure that determines. So it's like a coach who decides to be more defensive or another one which decides to be more attacking. In the long run, it doesn't really matter. Now, what we tend to focus more on is the fact that we look for one person. Like I said, it's a messiah complex. One person or one group of people, it may be the president, it may not even be the president, but just want one person to be responsible. Now, when you ask the average Nigerian, what should be the ideal thing? Many people cannot answer. I mean, over a month ago, there was a hue and cry over electricity. And I asked, they said the electricity is expensive. I'm not making a price for any, and I'm not even going there. But my point is, what should be the ideal cost? Nobody can say. You want to be a medical doctor, but you don't know that you need to read about physics. You don't know you need to read chemistry. You don't know you need to read biology, but you just want to be a medical doctor. That's the case with Nigerians. We want cheap fuel. What is the average cost of fuel? Nobody knows. What is the production issue? Nobody knows. What are the parameters that are hindering production? The local things. Nobody knows. But we just want cheap fuel, and we know the person responsible for it is this. That's not the way society functions. A functional society, that is not the way a system functions. A system is made up of component parts. And a system, just like you have your biological systems, you have your reproductive system, you have your respiratory system, you have your digestive system. The mouth has its function, the stomach has its function, the pancreas has its function. The system functions when the component parts start to do their job. We, as a society, need to understand that for this society to work, every component has to do their job. And I think that is the part that is missing in our national dialogue, whether it be in energy, whether it be in every area. The man on the street has a responsibility. His responsibility as a citizen of the nation or a citizen of an OPEC nation is to know certain things, is not to be totally ignorant. The man in NNPC who opens the gate has a responsibility. The man on the field in NNPC has a responsibility. The management of NNPC, they do have their responsibility. The media, the civil society, the associations, everybody has a responsibility. When we take away the responsibility of the component parts, we are actually promoting inadvertently a dysfunctional society. And I think that is the place that we need to look at in terms of results being achieved. Because whether this government achieves or not, in 2027, they may leave, or whatever time they will leave, and we'll still be back to the same questions. Will it not be better for all of us that we will have a functional society that whether they leave or not, we'll be improving as a nation? And the way to do that is for the component parts to function.
Mr. Gilisari, I'd like to return to the matter of crude oil theft, which was one of the promised components in the manifesto. I'd like you to respond to it as well, particularly within the context of whether or not you are seeing the deployment of technological interventions for the monitoring of our pipelines to prevent crude oil theft, and also really can the promise of crude or stopping crude oil theft be delivered without seeing the prosecution of individuals, particularly where we have seen major oil bursts without any form of consequence to those events? Mr. Gilisari, that's for you.
Well, my recommendations are straightforward. One, anybody that commits a crime should be brought to book. Number two, the fact that we have a private security firm that's been helping the government to work is not an aberration. It is rather, progressive, and I think I encourage that. But the result should be equivalent to what it is, what payments and what services are required. So, for instance, if a security company apprehends a vessel that is laden with stolen crude oil, I really do not see what is the wisdom in burning that vessel or destroying the crude oil. It is a loss to us. It's a further degradation and pollution of our environment, and it doesn't in any way help because it's part of the 200,000 barrels a day that should have been put into the production quota. The other reason that I think that government should pay adequate attention to security, especially using technology, is that they are both very, very much, I don't know what word to use, but they are very critical in combating this menace. Technology in the sense that you can stay from a control center and see what's going on. But the human component that should have boots on the ground to get to where there are infractions is very critical. I don't think that we are lacking that security today. But the fact is, what does it do? And just like Asale said, such technologies and their capacities and capabilities should be made public, so that those who are attempting to make any kind of attempt to steal crude oil further will desist from it. The other thing is, one technology may not fit all. So there's so many different things that we can do. We can use drones, we can use satellite imaging, we can also use, boots on ground, like I said, pipelines that are laid in mangrove forests, thick forests that people cannot go. Of course, those are predominantly attraction for crude oil theft. Those areas, the communities should be part of the process. And I do agree that every Nigerian should be part of the solution. Because if we are not, if we see something we don't tell, if we know something we do not say, we are just ultimately undoing Nigeria. So the security part of it is very critical. Technology is very critical. But more than anything else, the human involvement of the various communities should be considered a top priority.
Let me come to you, Mr. Esele. There is a promise made here, which is what we're trying to speak to, as I've emphasized. Say to achieve full deregulation of the midstream gas prices within 6 months, increase gas production by 20%, and complete critical gas infrastructure project by 2027. Mr. Esele, I would like you to speak to what development you've seen based on this promise.
I think when you talk about deregulation, I don't think they've actually done that. I think what you have is also what I would say partial deregulation. Not completely. The subsidy is still part of the pump price that there's subsidy in it, and that in itself is there. When you talk in terms of gas, you also have those challenges. So what you have now is that I always use the word as there's the economic side of deregulation, and there is the political economic side of deregulation. So it's for the government to find a balance. And the last time I was also here, and I had alluded to the fact that there was still subsidy payment, and there was some deniers. Then later, everybody started agreeing that there was subsidy payment still going on. So in terms of deregulation, I don't think they've done that. And then if you still talk about deregulation, you still find that NNPC is still the only one bringing in product. And that is also another challenge that NNPC is facing itself, because it now looks very opaque for us, because NNPC is the one bringing product. NNPC now decide this is how much we are bringing it in, and this is how much we have to sell. So the regulation of the midstream or the downstream, no, has not been done. That just only be done partially, because what we are paying at the pump station, actually we are paying far less than the price that we are supposed to pay. But that in itself is also to make sure that the social aspect of the society does not collapse. Because if they actually go ahead and say, okay, this is how much we should be paying at the pump price, I think the social dislocation will be enormous. Therefore, I think the government is playing a little bit of politics with that downstream deregulation, which is also understandable. That's why when I hear economics says that take away the pump price, let it be fully deregulated, I always laugh, because at the bottom line, the economics will tell you all things being equal. And we know that in terms of economic, nothing is ever equal. So on that scorecard, I will say rather maybe 40% what they have done in terms of also providing the infrastructure for gas. They are making the right noises, they are saying the right things, but since they gave themselves the timeline of 2027, this is the only one they talked about 6 months. But if I look at it 6 months down the road, yes, they are making all the right noises, but are they there yet? No.
And let's move on to another component of the promised deliverables by the government, which is to accelerate full implementation of the PIA and implement additional favorable policies. I'll come to you, Mr. Showmi, on this one. Are you seeing any activity in that regard? And if indeed you're seeing it, shouldn't we be recording more indigenous local content in the oil and gas sector, particularly in the area of, mining of crude oil petroleum, and indeed every other area where, the PIA borders on as far as implementation is concerned? Mr. Showmi.
Okay, I think this is one area where there's been significant progress and success within the industry. If you recall, I think about 20 years ago, there weren't really any private companies involved. I mean, one of the success stories for local companies is Seplat, which is today about to buy the assets for ExxonMobil. That would have been unheard of 20 years ago and a number of things. But in terms of the PIA itself, one key component of the PIA states that for the joint venture operations need to be, I think, privatized or something, where they need to be independent entities where they'll be registered. That has not been achieved. But I understand for the news that is filtering in from within the industry is that they are about to achieve something with Indorama. And once that happens, for all the various joint ventures, what that means is that the joint venture operations themselves as an entity will be able to source for funding, and they will be able to, people will be able to interact with them as separate entities. It should be understood very clearly that the PIA is not something that is going to be implemented overnight. It's not like all the other laws. This is an industry that has been operating without an omnibus law for over half a decade, more than 50 years, and now we have a law, and we don't expect everything to fall into line within 2 years or a year. Yes, in ideal circumstances it should, but there are so many things that are not in ideal in those situations. And this is also important to get our ducks in a row before we act, because one of the challenges with the power sector was there was some amount of rush. Yes, it was delayed, but there was rush into the privatization without proper check. And that is what we have also suffered across the years. So do we want to experience the same kind of rush and have similar stop gaps and quick stops in the process? I think that ought not to be. So what we will look at the fundamentals is that as they talked about separate entities the regulator being separated as separate entities, as that happens, yes, we have two regulators for the industry, a dedicated regulator looking at gas, which will be the midstream aspect, and that has enabled a minister to come out. These are significant changes in terms of policy plans, in terms of forward-looking directions. In terms of the effect, you'll be able to see there to be a focus for there to say that every single filling station across the nation should have something to do for gas. I mean, those are progress, whichever way you look at it. Finally, and more importantly, is the fact that the PIA is a law. It is not an action. So laws are like, when you talk about your road, an express, a freeway, an express road, there are those white lines or those dotted lines on the road. They are actually guidelines. It is still the people that are operating that will determine that these guidelines function. Because if you have somebody who considers himself a speed maniac, and he does not obey the laws of the road, and he does not drive within the confines of the white lines, and he overtakes when he should not overtake, it will still be dangerous. So laws have limitations to the extent that people and those who are operating around it obey those laws. But equally as important as people operating is the culture. We must have...
My sincere apology, if you can land your thoughts in 10 seconds. We're totally out of time.
So at the end of the day, the culture is equally as important as the people, for people to have a culture that obeys the laws and so that the laws can work.
All right, Mr. Shomu, the whole idea of this is to make government more accountable at the end of the day. For Nigerians, will the fuel be cheaper, the PMS, which is the basic? Will it be cheaper at the end of the day? Will it be more expensive? What should we be looking out for? Which is why we're having all this maybe complicated or complex conversation. At the end, it's about affordability and accessibility. But in rounding off, quick one, we do an assessment of each sector we review. Mr. Shomu, let's start with you since you were the last person to speak. In terms of effort and in terms of results from the petroleum sector, oil and gas sector, how would you assess the government over 100? Effort and result. Mr. Shomu.
Okay, in terms of effort, you probably give them an A, so 75 will be will be okay. In terms of results, I think a C will be okay. We give them 55. I mean, those are my own personal views.
All right, Mr. Billis Harris, my apology, we didn't have to take all of the last question from you, because of time, but your assessment, efforts and results.
So again, like I said, in terms of effort...
No, I'm talking to Mr. Gillis, Mr. Gillis Harris. Mr. Gillis Harris.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much. My assessment in the PIA implementation itself, I would say about 60. And then for efforts, we are up to 80% in the efforts we make. But the implementation will be much more where we should be.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what you mean by where we should be. What is that?
What it means is that I'm giving a credit.
Okay, that's 50. Mr. Esele, quick words. Let's come to Mr. Esele. Efforts and results.
BC. Effort B, result C.
Oh, interesting. That appears to be a pass mark for the government in the area of oil and gas, particularly a departure from, assessment of other sectors in the last 1 week. But we'd like to thank you very much, gentlemen, as we, hope that the administration will reflect on your assessment and apply more effort such that more results can be seen in the near future. Mr. Peter Esele is a former president, Trade Union Congress, a former president, Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, Pengasan. Thank you so much, sir. We've also had Mr. Olabode Shoumi, Chairman, New Energies and Hydrogen Study Group of NGA, and member group of experts on Gas, UNECE. Thank you so much, Mr. Shoumi, who joined us from our Abuja studio. Also, we've had, as a member of our distinguished three-man panel today, Mr. Billy Gillis Harry, the National President, Petroleum Products Retail Outlets Owners Association of Nigeria, Petrian, who also joined us from our Abuja studio. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and expert contributions on the program.
Thank you.
And up next, we turn our attention to the politics of Kano State, the historical aspect and the contemporary aspect. What's the implication for the future of Kano State and the stability of that state? Join us for this all-important conversation. After this break, we'll be right back.